In today's episode of From the Trenches, I'm going to be chatting to you about how I've used some objective data, some wellness data, and in this case, or this story, I'm going to tell you how I've used it retrospectively to guide my own training moving forward. Now, when we look towards the data that we can have with the different wearables, there's lots of different products out there on the market. In particular, today, I'm going to be talking about the Whoop watch. The Whoop is a wearable watch in this case, so you can actually wear it on your arm or other positions. And it continually collects data 24/7. And the information gets Bluetooth to an app which sits on your phone. And it collects a whole heap of different metrics and data, anything from sleep, all kind of heart rate data, heart rate variability, strain, recovery, and all these metrics which we like to try and collect and make some sense of. And this story today is really about how I have been collecting this data over a long period of time, and through experience or retrospectively looking at old data, I was able to use that information to change my own course of training for a positive outcome. In particular, we're going to refer back to Friday, February the 9th. The night before, my sleep wasn't great. Around 2 o'clock, I woke up. I could feel my body temperature rise, and it took me a little bit of time to get back to sleep. The good thing about the Whoop is it gives you a whole heap of different metrics. And in particular, we're going to look at a few things that are related to well-being. In particular, resting heart rate. You can see a little bit higher than normal at 68 on this Friday. My respiratory rate, my breath a little bit heavier than normal, and that was up above my average. And then heart rate variability. This is a really interesting one. Typically, the higher your heart rate variability, it's indicative of fitness. I've found compared to other people that I coach that my heart rate variability seems to sit a little bit lower. The day before, it was rising up 29 to 30, dipped down, and then around 27. In the grand scheme of it, it hasn't moved a lot. However, I just wasn't feeling great. Thought to myself, what am I going to do? Now, from experience, which I'm going to show you the data in a minute, instead of lifting, which I normally would have done, I thought for once I was going to listen to my body. Wasn't overly happy, but I thought, well, this is the best thing that I can do, knowing what's happened to me before. If we just go back in time for a little minute, and that's what I want to do, is show you the data about last time I felt like this exact same scenario. And this is back in late November. Same scenario, I woke up in the morning, I felt okay. We can see here that my recovery is in the green, but when I look at my heart rate variability, it started to go up. Now for me, that is unusually high, 36, dipping down, not getting a lot of information out of the heart rate variability at the moment. However, when we look at my resting heart rate, it's 59. Well, if we look at the previous data, and that's probably a bigger indication of what's been happening the few days before. And just to give a little bit more context, that Monday to Thursday, I actually didn't do any training. I traveled interstate, I went to a funeral, and I traveled back home. And I woke up on that Friday feeling like this. Therefore, when we think about monitoring, we would typically think about the monitoring that revolves around what we do in our training. And the other things that we need to consider, aside from our physical training, but also our mental and cognitive load. Are we doing a lot of training? Under we a lot of stress at work or at school? Have we had some bad news that has been wearing on us that psychologically has been creating a level of stress that is really hard to measure? And all these things take into account. And we can see that my previous data from the Saturday on the 18th was quite high. For me, that's quite high. It's down around 59. And my respiratory rate is up a little bit. So if we go back to this day, Friday, I woke up in the morning. I had a little bit of time to myself. I thought, well, I don't feel great, but I've got time. I'm going to do a gym session. To be honest, the gym session was pretty tough going. So I just took a little bit more time with my rest periods, but it was still pretty hard. And then if we look at the next day, when I woke up on the Saturday, we could see that my recovery had started to go down. My quality of sleep had decreased. Not much is happening with the heart rate variability. I did, however, know that I wasn't feeling really great on the Saturday. And then we get to the Sunday where I'm feeling at my worst. And that 1% recovery is probably reflective of how I felt. I didn't feel great. Although if we look at the sleep, it said that I had 99% sleep. Essentially, that Saturday night, I didn't feel great. I had a big 8-hour sleep. And also on the Sunday, I had 2 naps, which, well, one is a nap and the other one's definitely a sleep. Therefore, I needed lots of sleep because, as we said, 1% recovered was reflective of how my body was feeling. If we look at the data over a longer period of time, and what I want to show you with this graph is the consequence of me doing that session and not listening to my body. This is Tuesday the 28th on the left, working all the way across, and it was on that Sunday before when I was at 1%. And we can see just in terms of globally from that top graph, there's lots of yellow, lots of red, and very little green. And we can see my heart rate variability all over the place. It's not really consistent, which for me, when it goes really high or it goes low, I have learned historically that something is not right with my body. This is a really important thing, understanding your data, is that you need to understand how it individually relates to the athlete. For me, when my heart rate variability is low or when it's high, something's just not right. Partly because I know my training is very consistent. I do the same type of sessions pretty much week in, week out. However, for me, I think resting heart rate is a lot more reflective. Again, on the top, you can see the flow of the 2-week period post when I felt my worst, and my resting heart rate was higher than normal. Normally I'm at around 58. I know that that's a good resting heart rate for me. And every day I'm getting up, I'm not feeling great, and I can definitely feel my resting heart rate is high. Similarly with the respiratory rate, that's just a feeling of I'm getting up in the morning and I'm just feeling a little bit more labored breathing throughout the day. Now let's fast forward back to the future, back to the present day. What I decided to do on the Friday is not to do any gym session. And what I'm going to do is just go through the next couple of days to show you the difference as to what happens when I decided to listen to my body and learn from experience. On the Saturday, I have to admit, although it said 87% recovered, I didn't really feel great that next day. Heart rate variability shot up to 51, and I can tell you what, that was not reflective of any kind of fitness improvement. My resting heart rate on that Saturday was still up high. On the Friday, it got up to 68, where it was 63, and for me, I know around 57 to 58 is a really good number. And my respiratory rate is also high. Therefore, I knew that on the Saturday, I was still not okay to train or do anything. Sunday was probably more of a true reflection of where I was at. My heart rate variability had plunged from 51 to 24. And when you look at the data explanation, when your heart rate variability drops, it says that that could potentially be an indication of not feeling very well. My resting heart rate is still elevated. It's getting better. And similarly with my respiratory rate, it's coming down, but I'm still not feeling great. And this is on the Monday. I'm 48% recovered. My heart rate variability has plateaued out a little bit. My resting heart rate is now down to 59, and my respiratory rate is more at a consistent number that I'm used to. Therefore, I decided on that Monday it was time to head back into the gym. And I did a session. I was careful with the volume that I did, and I got through it quite successfully. Some of the metrics with the Whoop watch that you can get is instantaneous data as well. It displays it in different ways. And here you can see that my respiratory rate on that Saturday, that's that most recent time period when I decided to take the day off on the Friday, that my respiratory rate was still elevated. Unfortunately, I don't have Friday's information because you can only collect it on the day. However, what was really interesting on that Friday when I woke up is that 4 elements were all flagging: my respiratory rate, my resting heart rate, my heart rate variability, and also my skin temperature. And that was really interesting. I commented on the Thursday night during that evening sleep that I woke up at 2 o'clock on the Friday morning with an elevated skin temperature. It picked that up, which is also a sign that potentially there's something not right with my body. And as we see on the Sunday, I have everything's nice and green, but I'm still not feeling really great. And therefore, an extra day's rest will do me good. And on the Monday, I've had 2 clean days, all in the green. Everything's back to normal. My skin temperature is within my normal range. And therefore, it was an indication to me that it was safe to start training again. Overall, I thought this was a really great way of combining objective data, in this case from a Whoop watch, with my subjective data, my experiences. And unfortunately, we tend to learn from our mistakes. But in this case, I actually listened to my body. And I think that's the first thing when we, as coaches, when we're dealing with athletes, they're very motivated and they want to keep pushing the boundaries of what they do in training. And they think sometimes that resting is that's going to be taking them backwards, and they tend to not listen to their body. And most of the time, the subjective questions, how are you feeling today? How well did you sleep? Can really give you that same information pretty much as these objective wearables. What I just used here is to back up my subjective feeling that I wasn't feeling great with objective data, and also learning on my past experiences. Now, you could say, well, what happens if I did train on the Friday? Would have this data changed any differently? And would have I not fallen into this 2-week hole? Well, for me, I wasn't really willing to go down feeling not well for another 2 more weeks, learning from my experiences. And for taking one day off, or in this case, the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I only missed 3 days of training, and I was able to get back into training on that Monday with no adverse reactions. And by the time I've now filmed this, I've come to the end of the week. It's now Friday, and I've been able to train successfully every single day. And my health is feeling great. I've made sure I've had enough sleep through the week, and I made sure my nutrition is really good. Therefore, this is, for me, a really great example of how we can combine all these data points. And I think that's the other take-home message, is that we need to be relying on several data points to give us the full picture. Once we find the metrics that work for us, they're the ones that we want to stick with. It could be, if I'm not feeling great, feel like my heart rate's up, my body temperature's up, and my breathing's a little bit more labored, maybe I should take a rest day. However, in the case of having some objective data, potentially I could look at seeing this more in advance. As we were seeing in the previous example back in November, earlier in the week, my resting heart rate was already elevated and had lots of other stresses going on in that midweek period. And the other important thing is that we need to make sure that if we are using wearables for our objective data, is that they are reliable. And when you look towards literature, there's some great readings on the validity of Whoop watches around sleep, heart rate, and heart rate variability. So I definitely have confidence in the data I'm getting from this wearable device. Hopefully there's some great take-home messages for you on how you can incorporate subjective but also quality objective data to help drive better training outcomes for the athletes that you work with. Thanks for listening.